are going to get started in the interest of time, so I can give Albert plenty of time to come up here and wow all of you. So good evening, beautiful people, and welcome. My name is Nora Atkinson. For those of you who don't know me, I am the Fleur and Charles Bressler Curator in Charge of the Renwick Gallery. And I would like to welcome you here this evening to the Smithsonian American Art Museum for the first talk of the season of our Clarice Smith Distinguished Lectures in American Art. Established in 2014, this series is made possible through the generosity of Clarice Smith and highlights excellence and innovation in American art with talks by outstanding artists, critics, and scholars. And Clarice is with us here this evening, and I'd like to especially thank her for making this program possible. So before we get started, a few of the usual quick housekeeping notes. First, always out of respect for our speaker and the rest of our audience, if you could please silence your cell phones now, that would be much appreciated. Also, if you have questions or comments during the program, you will find this handy little comment card in all of your programs. This is there for you to write down any of your comments, any of your insightful questions. People will come around at the end of the program to collect these so that we can discuss them at the end of the lecture. So if you have an amazing thought, please jot it down. Don't call it out, and we will talk about those at the end. Finally, I want to remind everyone, in case you are not aware, that after the program, the evening is not over. We have a reception that will be going on in Kogod Courtyard, so you are invited to join us and continue the conversation then. And now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening, a celebrated artist and one of the true pioneers of the American studio craft movement. Working out of his studio in Rochester, New York, Albert Paley has been an active artist now for over 50 years. He is the first metal sculptor to receive the coveted Institute Honors awarded by the American Institute of Architects, the AIA's highest award to a non-architect. The allure of his work, as one noted architect stated, comes through its intrinsic sense of integration of art and architecture. A distinguished professor, Paley holds an endowed chair at the College of Imaging and Sciences at Rochester Institute of Technology. Now, I'd like to point out, as some of you know, the Renwick has a special history with Albert Paley, and we're honored to count ourselves as playing an important role in the trajectory of his artistic career. Paley was a highly successful jeweler in 1974 when he was invited to enter and won the Renwick Gallery's national competition to design decorative doors for its shop. His portal gates, or as we usually refer to them around our place, the Paley gates, became an instant icon of the museum and propelled his practice towards the monumental architectural ironwork for which he's best known today. To date, Albert Paley has completed over 50 site-specific commissions for public and private institutions, to name a few, including Synergy, a ceremonial archway in Philadelphia; Sentinel, a monumental Plaza sculpture for Rochester Institute of Technology; Animals Always, a 130-foot-long archway at the St. Louis Zoo; Threshold, a sculpture for the corporate headquarters of Klein Steel in Rochester; and Transformation, a ceremonial archway for Iowa State University. His work can be found in the permanent collections of major museums, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and many others. And in 2014, he was honored with a major solo exhibition, American Metal, The Art of Albert Paley, at the Corcoran Gallery of Art, which some of you may have had the opportunity to see. It was a fabulous show. Paley received both his BFA and MFA from Tyler School of Art in Philadelphia. He received honorary doctorates from the University of Rochester in 1989, the State University of New York at Brockport in 1996, St. Lawrence University in Canton, New York in 1997, and the University of Gothenburg in Sweden in 2012. He's lectured extensively throughout the world and has been broadly published. Of course, I could go on and on about all of his accomplishments, but I'm sure you would rather hear him talk a little bit himself. So please welcome me tonight please join me in welcoming our distinguished speaker, Albert Paley.
Oh, thank you very much, and I'm pleased that you're all here. I'm glad I have the opportunity to address this, and thank you for the introduction. And also, Clarice Smith, thank you for the opportunity to do this. My work has changed and evolved over the years, and some people know me from different parts of my career. And I thought I would give kind of an overview chronologically of that evolution and that development. For me, I go to the studio almost every day, so the reality to me is kind of unchanging, but the results have changed from time to time. Presently, I'm located in Rochester, New York. This is my present studio. It's a 50,000 square foot space. I have 16 employees. Half of them are in administration. I have a project manager, a director, a secretary, and the most creative person is the accountant in the studio. And one thing that we have always done from the beginning is documentation has always been extremely important to me. And I've had a full-time archivist for over 35 years, and we maintain, quite a major archive. This is the main fabrication area in the studio where the work happens. We have 30 foot under crane bay. And this shows you some of the work that's in production. And for works larger than 30 foot, we have an outside space where we use various cranes to build the large work. And so presently, the structure of the studio is around large-scale, site-specific work. And also, we take a lot of major commission work on as well. But I want to go back to the beginning. As was mentioned, I went to Tyler School of Fine Art. And at that time, the studio practice then, this was in the early 60s, it's a time when pop art was happening. But the program at Tyler was kind of based on the Renaissance tradition, the diversity of materials, the working habits that you would do. My undergraduate degree was in sculpture and basically figurative work. And I got very involved with process. When you think of stone, you think of, hammers and chisels and the stone being hard. So learning the process and learning how to develop form is one thing. But actually, with the carving, you're doing just the opposite. The deeper you carve, the deeper the shadow is. So here you're dealing with this hard material, yet at the same time, you're dealing with these ephemeral effects, visual effects. And that whole dichotomy and that of process and the visualization has become very much a part of what I'm involved in. This is kind of an exercise in humility. This is so from the very literal figurative work became involved with kind of abstraction. The sculpture studio at that time was kind of based on direct carving. Was when Henry Moore was quite prominent. And then as the work evolved, it became, purely non-literal, unform-related. For whatever reason, I tended drift more towards the organic and the interrelationships of forms, the play of form and space and the three-dimensional nature. Even though I did drawing and printmaking and various graphics, to me, three-dimensional reality is more of a reality. I, as a form, I walk through space, I feel gravity, I cast a shadow, and so does the sculpture. As I became involved with the process of art, the technology became very important. I became enamored with metals. Metals are very, very difficult, but the processes are very complex, and for me, it was a challenge. And so I did my master's degree in goldsmithing. And this was my first goldsmithing studio in 1969, and I went to teach at Rochester Institute of Technology, and I led the goldsmithing program at the School for American Craftsmen. And so this is the type of jewelry I was doing. I would always approach the jewelry as an art form and not as a commercial enterprise. It wasn't seen as jewelry as a fashion accessory, but the sense of the body and how does the jewelry bring focus and accent to the human form. So here you see the jewelry focuses on the pectoral region of the body. It focuses on the silhouette and also in the rear. So therefore, dealing with the three-dimensional nature of form, the jewelry does that. And also, too, the only time the form really resolves itself is when it's on the body. So the context of the jewelry was just as important as the jewelry itself. The complexity, the ornamentation, the various materials were part of that. Besides doing the gold and silver work, I started forging iron mainly as a tool maker. I forged hammers and chisels and stakes so I could form the jewelry. And I became very enamored, because usually those of you who are involved with gold and silver, when you're hammering or forming gold and silver, the material gets hard and you have to heat it and anneal it to make it soft to continue, and you go back and forth and back and forth. With iron, it's just the opposite. You forge it at 1,000 degrees. It's kind of, it's continually at a plastic heat. And in the process of me experiencing the iron was one of plasticity. It wasn't hard and rigid and unyielding. So here you have two pieces of metal. One becomes this, the base for this candle holder, and another piece that is wrapped up. When the metal is hot, it moves and it gestures, and then when it cools, the motion's kind of frozen. And that whole aspect of experiencing motion, yet at the same time of being frozen, it's almost like a time-lapse photography. So the earlier works were just objects that would be placed anywhere. I had a commission of doing a plant holder, and this is the first time I had to think of the environment where the plant went. It has to get light, but also how it's positioned in the house. So in many ways, the relationship that I had developed with the jewelry on the human body, of how it relates to that, so now it was the same thing as how does the artwork relate to architectural space, and how does it deal with the pedestrian reality? I mean, it seems very simple, but you don't want to walk over and hit your head on the plant stand or whatever. So, so at that point, this was 1971, there was a competition for gates for the Renwick Gallery. I think there was 6 people that were invited, and based on my design as a goldsmith and my working with iron, just the small pieces that you saw, this was well, it's kind of faded, but this was the drawing that was submitted, and I won the competition. At that time, I just was working in my goldsmithing studio, so based on the commission, this was an industrial space that I rented, and I had my first employee, because a lot of the forging processes are 2-people operation. So here I'm standing at the forge with the heated steel, and my assistant is being a straker. And it took us 1 year to produce the gates. And here you can see them in production. The same kind of complexity of the design, the same as the jewelry. The jewelry was oxidized silver, which was black and gold. And here you have black and steel with polished bronze. So, so the coloration is the same. And so this was a year of work. So the design sensibilities, the application of form, the attention to detail, the quality of line, that's the same. But now it's become, now it's how do you bring focus and accent to the architectural space. And also I wanted to create a sense of symbolism in reference to this cultural institution, which I felt was very important. So that aspect of quality, which is hard to define, I think had to do with the workmanship and the aspect of detailing. One of the things, because the work is non-literal, I wanted to have the form somehow, and that's still the same thing with me, is how does the form explain itself? So here, this main form that you see in the middle of the gates, one form you see this element just about the curve, and then here you see the curve happens. So in a lot of ways, this is explaining what happens here, and this is explaining what this used to do. So in many ways, I'm trying to develop a vocabulary for people to understand the form, and then also all of the mechanisms for attaching and holding this together become not just mechanical, but also aesthetic determinations. Because I approach, for me, each project I do is I created an experience to learn something. And it was only giving a lecture many years afterwards that I looked back, and just prior to doing the Smithsonian gates. This was a pendant that I had done. And here you see the center of that pendant is this elliptical form. And then the brackets at the bottom, the horizontal. So in many ways, the design of the Smithsonian was this ellipse, and then with the horizontal, the horizontal banding. And actually, a couple of years after this, the Renwick acquired this pendant for, I don't know why this isn't. This is not programmed. We have a problem here. I need some technical assistance here. I can do anything with metal. When it comes to this electrical stuff, I'm totally lost. No, here's the man with the magic touch. So here we go. Here we go.
Okay, this will get you to the next one, and if this doesn't, okay, I'm going to try the alternate method. Oh, okay, I see.
We wanted to create a sense of drama, you understand, just...
Okay, now I bet you we're back in gear. Yes, we're back in gear.
Okay, beautiful. Well, thank you, sir. It's good to have a backup system. So one thing, this was my first major architectural commission, and it has become, as you know, the kind of an icon of the Renwick. And I was very pleased that the poster that they had of a national iron show that this was featured. Because of the prestige of the Smithsonian, I started getting other commissions in the architectural arena. This is the Washington Museum of Art in Chattanooga, Tennessee. It's a 19th century building. They were cantilevering a new addition. I was asked to do a sculpture enclosure, which basically a fence between this point and this point. And so this was the initial drawing for the fence. And here you can see its rendition in iron. So now it's drawing a line in space. This is a 50-foot long section. So in many ways, the starkness of the line in space relates to the new contemporary cast concrete building. Yet at the same time, the complexity of design is very similar to the Corinthian columns. So in many ways, this fence acts as a transitional element to kind of unify this very kind of ambiguous space. But also with large-scale work, is how does it deal with the architectural proportions, but as well, how does it address the pedestrian arena? So when you walk up to this, there's details that can only be seen in close proximity to create that unique experience with the viewer. There was a major documentary that was done with the development of this fence that won an international award, which extended the extent of that. After working on the Smithsonian gates and then the screen, I did some pure sculpture in forged iron. This is at the Worcester Museum of Art. This is 20-foot long and 13-foot high. And again, this gestural line in space. And one thing that is always a part of my work that was developed from this, that this form is totally different from this and from this, but you can see the evolution of the form, that one form determines the other, and that it's only within context that you have this sense of harmony. And that sense of juxtaposition is always something that's very, very important to me. Margaret Woodbury Strong Museum approached me about doing a sculpture, a freestanding sculpture in front of their building. This is the first large sculpture. And based on the forged aesthetic, I developed this model, but I couldn't forge anything that big. So this was a whole metamorphosis that happened, that I took the forged aesthetic and then this became a hollow construction. So here you can see the form. These are all there's not one flat plane. This is all concave, convex forms that are welded together and then highly ground. So before, when I used to hammer or file an edge, now it's a fabricated piece that you see. And so here you can see it in its final position. So here you see the sculpture breaks the skyline of the building and at the same time penetrates into the ground. So in many ways, the sculpture becomes a transitional element between the architecture and landscape design. So here you have the architectonic quality of the building with the geometry of the sculpture, yet at the same time within an organic context. So to create this sense of union and sense of identity. This was the first major, this is the extension of the Willard Hotel. This was the main lobby. So here we do the sculpture in the back that you see, and I also did the bronze hardware. So you look at where you're going, you touch the semicircular elements, and then you go in. So here the crenellation at the top of the building is amplified by the sculpture and also the coloration as well. So creating a sense of place and a sense of identity for this corridor was the main situation. Yet at the same time, kind of harmonizing and bringing focus to that. So now there's forged elements and also fabricated elements. So we're starting to get this combination again. Because of the work in the Smithsonian, this was the restoration architect, John Misick, did the restoration for the state capitol in Albany, New York. And this was in 1980. It was the H.H. Richardson building that was being rehabbed. And at that time, it's the first time that terrorism started to be talked about in public spaces. And there was 2 antechambers on each side of the Senate. And I was asked to do 2 gates. And where the Renwick was, for a better term, more decorative, here you can see this gate is more formal, dealing with the formal quality of that administrative building. So there was 2 gates. My staff had grown to 6 people at that time. My technology is about 1850. As you can see, this is the old-time religion. You know, it's hammers and tongs and all of that. It took us a year to do with these 2 gates. And here you can see them within context. So the quality of the stone carving is the same as the quality of the metal. The bronze relates to the chandeliers. And even the groined vault that you see that's picked up on those arched elements. And actually, these gates brought me greater attention to the architectural community. I won my first AIA award from that. And here you can see the center cresting of that. And there was also a major documentary that was done on that project as well. So with the Smithsonian gates and with the gates in Albany, they were basically 19th century structures. At this time, postmodernism started to engage, and this was the Virginia Museum of Art in Richmond, Virginia. Hardy, Holtzman, and Pfeiffer were the architects, and you can see they're using the vernacular of the Renaissance, this rusticated stone, and bringing that in. And ornamentation was always part of that tradition. And so this, so here, I was initially going to forge large pieces of steel to create this vehicular gate, but it would be too heavy to do that. So I took, again, the forged aesthetic, and this became a fabricated concave and convex shapes. So this has a rack and pinion gear and a motor, and the gate literally drives itself open and drives itself shut. And there's also a gate that opens for pedestrians to go in. And then as well, this was a gate for a pedestrian entrance, and the elements come out and they point to the seams of the stone. So in a lot of ways, kind of expressing, you know, the quality of that the massive stone application. This was another national competition. This was for Pennsylvania Avenue Development Corporation. This is open to architects, landscape designers, and artists, and I won the competition for tree grates up and down Pennsylvania Avenue. We did about 2,000 grates. So the original form was carved in wood. Then a sand mold is taken. This is for one of the bench units. And here you can see there are these telescoping rings. They're breakaway rings. So as the tree grows, you can expand that. And here you can see the formality of Pennsylvania Avenue and how the gates function. And even within the cast iron, the sense of detail. It was interesting. I went to the foundry and after I won the commission, I gave them the design, and they said, we can't do this, there's too much detail. And I said, well, that's impossible. I said, you see, the Hector Guimard cast iron things in the subway in Paris. So they said, let's see what we could do. And they brought back pattern makers that were 80 and 90 years old that had the skills to cut the wood to make this happen. So it's really an amazing thing with technology and application of how that is. And here you can see the main plazas were also developed as well. Now the trees have grown, and there's very few of these left, but nevertheless. This was the architectural model for the Wortham Center in Houston, Texas. And you can see that there's palm trees in this model inside the building. And I got a call. I got a call in my studio, and the architect was on the phone. He said, are you the sculptor that does large-scale work? And I said, I've done a couple of those things. And he says, have you ever worked in stainless steel? And I said, yes. And he said, did you ever work in plexiglass? And I said, well, I don't really use plexiglass, but as a student I worked in it. And he says, good. He said, we have a problem here that maybe you can help us solve. Now, this was a second model, but they used to have an alley of palm trees that went up to the building, and then they would have palm trees planted inside, so you'd have that continuum. So he explained that to me, but he says because of the heat and the lack of sun, he said we'd have problems with the trees dying, and he said we thought you could make us a stainless steel palm trees with plexiglass. And he said, could you do such a thing? And I said, well, I could do something, but I said, I'm not too sure. And he says, well, that's good, because we also have a problem because we have a lighting issue in there, and we thought you could make coconuts into swivel lights. So I said, let me come down and talk to you. And so at that time, this was in the early 80s. I don't know if you remember, in the early 80s, there was an oil embargo, and the money that was going into this in Houston was taken away, and the inside of the building was very, very austere. And they wanted something to kind of enliven and also humanize the space. And so this is what I came up with. It was a series of 8 sculptures that went up, and I started to think about an opera house and, color. This is the first colored piece I ever did, polychrome work. And the main function of color is to solicit emotion. And this kind of trompe-l'oeil aspect of these folding ribbons into space, thinking of music and thinking of the emotional context, I thought would be important. Just to get a sense of scale, those pod-like shapes you see at the top, this is one of them being fabricated. There's literally thousands of pieces of steel that are heated and formed and welded together. And so here you can see one of the main ones being done in my studio. This was way beyond the scope of my studio, so I also had to increase my staff, and I moved. We moved into this location, which I was in for 26 years until I moved to my new location. And then within that, I was able to have the space to construct these. And so here you can see they start at 12 foot, and they go up to 30 foot, so they increase in scale. Also, I had the color become more intense as it went up, and they became more active when they came up. So there's this sense of progression that happens. And then when you're at the top, you look out over there, and these kind of stylized ribbon or banner shapes as they come out, it creates this kind of pedestrian arena. It's like if you're in a park and you stand under a bough of a tree, you get this kind of intimacy in that space. So I wanted people to, experience that. And then also, it's hard to see on the front of the building, we also have the door handles. And so you literally grab that form and you walk in. The first sculpture is about human proportion, and then you go up through this progression. And then when you get to the opera boxes, there's a different set of handles. So there's this thread of consistency that is going through. And when the grand opening for the Opera House happened, this was a poster that was at the airport. And even though I'm involved so much, it's amazing the symbolic interest, the symbolic focus that people have with the symbolism of art. And these actually have become the symbols of the Opera House and of other institutions as well. For me as an artist, just to have skill to make something, for me, isn't of interest. It's kind of what I learned through the process. So I had worked a whole year on these verticals and these kind of stylized banner shapes. So this sculpture was kind of a synthesis of everything that I had experienced on this piece. And even though you're dealing with this massive steel that's heavy, you can see that with this almost this ephemeral quality. And this brings in a very important aspect that I'm always aware of, is that when people look at this, they experience motion, they experience this ephemeral effect, yet at the same time, they know that it's hard, rigid steel. So you understand one thing, but emotionally you're experiencing the same thing. So how do they come together? So they come together through the aspect of paradox, which is fundamentally a human condition. So you experience motion, yet you know it's not. And it kind of brings the similar nature together. So here, the act of passage through the Smithsonian gates, through the Albany gates, through the progression through the Opera House. Now the act of passage is through the ceremonial archway. This is for the city of Philadelphia. So here you can see these two pylons. So now the context becomes the skyline of the city. And this is the first time we started to use lighting to dramatize that. Most city streets are fairly ubiquitous. One street looks like the other. And so here I wanted to create this sense of place and this sense of identity. And also the act of passage. In architecture, the most prominent thing is the entranceway. You go from inside to outside, from light to dark, and you deal with that passage of time and that passage of memory. I just wanted to show you some of the diversity of some of the projects we've done. These were two menorahs for the Washington Hebrew congregation. This is the maquette for a sculpture called Olympia for AT&T and Landmark in Atlanta, Georgia. You can see it in fabrication. So now what has happened is usually with architecture, you have the relationship to landscape design. You get this play with landscape and architecture. Now with the sculpture, it brings a third dimension. So this sculpture now creates this pedestrian arena before you go into the building, very much the way a foyer functions with inside the building itself. So this creates that whole progression from when you're going from the parking lot to create this pedestrian awareness and sense of identity into the building as well. Besides the transformation of form, so for instance, these are gates that I designed for University of Arizona in Tempe. So initially, when I was forging steel, I would hit it with a hammer to create forms, and the hammer would create marks, or I would cut it with a chisel. And so now I would then, instead of doing that, the form vocabulary is from that understanding, but then I would draw kind of a textured, what used to be a hammer mark, or draw a slit like here, or here would be the hammer mark. So then I would do the drawing. The drawing would be scanned into a computer. The computer would then laser cut the steel, and then we would form it and put it together. So it's this aspect of transformation technically, but also the understanding of form. So here you can see the gates, and the top of the gates, crest, and then you see the landscaping in the back. And actually, these are incredibly symbolic gates because they only open them twice a year. They open them when the freshmen come in and when you graduate, when you go out. So it's very, very symbolic act of passage in many different ways. Even though I do large-scale work, we also do a lot of interior work as well, basically decorative arts and furniture. The Victoria and Albert Museum had not commissioned a contemporary work of art for 75 years, and I was commissioned to do a bench for the museum. And at that time, I wanted to put all of the vocabulary that I knew about forged metal, that you see here. And the same thing is in the gates. So here, the piece is twisted, and it's punched through, and these decorative rivets and slits and twisting, and try to put everything that I knew in that. So if it was a vocabulary, so here you can see the gate in that. It weighs 1.5 tons, so you dust around it. You don't. Just to show you how a certain aesthetic can kind of weave through a complex, this is Rosecliff. It doesn't exist now, but it was an investment firm in New York City. These were the main entrance doors that were 13 foot high. So here you have the door handles that you open up. The whole interior was glass, so the glass walls now, these escutcheon plates, hold the glass together, and you see they get larger as they go up to accentuate the height. And then some of the glass panels have door handles on them, and they create, the opening. At the end of the corridor was the boardroom door, and so the hinges and the handles are on the glass, and then you open it up. And then this is actually a dividing wall between these two offices, and so we also did the desks as well, and also the lamps. So here you get the same aesthetic that is woven through that complex. Even though I was trained and disciplined as a draftsman, for many years I refused to draw because I thought drawing was misleading. If I was thinking about something or drawing a line, I was responding to a graphic rendition rather than the physicality of the steel itself. But then I started, as time went on, I started drawing, and then I figured, well, drawing maybe can be a vehicle for form development and not just the physicality of the material. So here you can see like this kind of, drawn line where we just kind of do this cross-hatching on a piece of paper. This became a drawing for Temple Israel in Dayton, Ohio. And this was the inside of the synagogue where there's two menorahs on either side and an eternal light, and then also where the Torahs are kept that you see. And basically the theme is the burning bush with smoke and all of that. Asheville, North Carolina, this was a GSA project, 1.5 of 1%, I think, or something from a federal project. This is for a federal building. And so the sculpture you see is opened at the base. This is 45 foot tall. The building was very austere and very geometric, and I wanted to do this line, this very staccato line, to create that contrast with the building. So the sculpture was in one piece. It was cut apart and went on a truck, and here you can see it's on the main corner in Asheville. You walk up, and I notice when people walk, they walk diagonally across the plaza. So now they walk through the sculpture. So in many ways, that whole theme of the ceremonial act of passage again. Because when you go in there, you're experiencing a different environment, and hopefully that personalizes that space. Bosch & Lomb, the optical firm, we're building a new building. Fox & Fowl Architects were the architects. This is 85 foot tall. I mean, even at that scale, this is all hand work. I mean, it's all forged and welded. But here you can see it in context of that space. So you see the skyline of that building. And there was basically an elliptical courtyard. The front of the building was concave. The front of the parking lot complex was concave. So the whole thing kind of evolves around this sculpture. Just showing the diversity of projects. This is Civic Center Plaza Courthouse in San Francisco. There was 4 entrance gates in the front, and then you go into a rotunda, and there was 8 gates. So we did a matter of 10 gates. These were all out of stainless steel. The web work was all machined, and this is all forged stainless. Technically, these were probably the most complex pieces that I ever accomplished. And here you can see in the rotunda area. Now here's the irony of this whole damn thing. So I spent 2 years doing this. I developed them. The year that I delivered them, the ADA laws went into effect. And the ADA laws say that a gate needs less than 5 pound pressure to open. And these were so heavy, it took more than 5 pounds pressure. So these gates are locked open all the day. And then they're locked at night. So unfortunately, people aren't able to go through them. Well, okay, so yeah, there you see the final And technically, anybody that's worked in these are impossible to do. I mean, absolutely impossible. And so we wanted to, again, get the steam through the building. So these are some earlier drawings that I did. So we took that drawing, and then we spray etched the elevator doors with the drawings. And then inside of the elevator, we did these door handles. So that experience then from inside to outside, that you have that kind of relationship. I was contacted by Adobe Systems in San Jose. They were doing their new corporate headquarters, and they wanted me to design a sculpture for their plaza. So I went there and I met with the president and the CEO, and as I was talking, they said, well, we want something that defines what our company is about. So I was aware of what Adobe had done and all the technological advances they had done at that time. And luckily I didn't say anything. I just said, what are you noted for? And they said, well, everybody thinks it's technology, that we've done all these advancements and technological computers. But they said anything that we develop becomes obsolete in 6 months. And he said, what we want to define our company as is human creativity. And so basically that was my design challenge. So I thought about this computer company and the significance and the importance. And then I started thinking about, in a computer, you put on a computer, the screen comes up, you click on, something else happens, you go in, you get the information, and you come out again. So in many ways, for me, it became a metaphor for this active passage. So here, it's almost like these are shims that you're going through. And so literally, you're entering into a computer and coming out. Now, the thing that's interesting with education, anybody's education, you have a certain idea about something, and as you get information, your ideas change, and there's this aspect of transformation that happens. So here, you literally walk through this portal, it becomes a ceremonial portal, kind of as a metaphor for that transition of perception that happens. And the sculpture goes into this water fountain and comes up the other side. That same aspect of entering through the sculpture, this was with Hardy, Holtzman, and Pfeiffer. This was Columbia, Missouri. These are two sculptures that you literally walk through to go into the building. And when you're on the inside, there's translucent and transparent glass, so you get different aspects of that. But the whole play of the sculpture with the facade of the building and the geometry and the play of shadow, I thought was, you can see the play on the rusticated stone with the shadow, and as I painted the edges of this sculpture to try to relate that. Here again was the development of a drawn image, layering one thing upon another, almost like a collage. This became the main entrance for the Naples Museum of Art. That's stainless steel, bronze, and corten. This is one of the larger projects. This is for the Rochester Institute of Technology. They started out fairly small, and the company grew, the university grew, and there was no main core. So I worked with Presley Associates out of Boston. We took a main parking lot next to the administration building and designed this pedestrian plaza, and you can see there's a sculpture there that I developed. Initially, there was no drawings with it. That sculpture was like 5 inches high. I developed it a little bit larger out of cardboard and then out of metal. And here you can see it's 85 foot. It's corten steel, bronze, and stainless. This was too large to get on a truck, so each individual piece was designed just big enough to set on a truck. And these kind of banner shapes that you see are this kind of ephemeral, almost like paper in space. This is one piece of stainless steel, weighs about 1,000 pounds. And here you can see it being formed. This is a break, and it's pinched. And you can't see it, but you can see there's some slate lines here. It's pinched at different intervals to create this curved shape. So all the pieces were shipped to the site with 2 cranes. And here you can see that play of these forms in space. And it continually changes with the light and shade. The theme that I brought to it was education and the dynamism of the educational process, one of transformation again, how ideas change one's perception, and so that was what I brought to it. The administration saw it as the blending of art and architecture. So here you see the whole plaza on the campus is red and black stone, and as it gets closer to the sculpture, it gets more dense with the black, and then we have this granite ring that goes around it. And there was a publication, and also PBS did a 1-hour special on that as well. This is Epoch. This on 6th and G Street here. This was the Washington Arts Council that commissioned it. And so again, you walk up and you walk through it. Dolores Kendrick, who is the poet laureate of Washington, came to my studio, watched the working of this happen, and created a poem that's incised on the inside of the sculpture. So when you walk through it, you can read, her reflection of that. But again, it's this sense of identity into that complex, and hopefully enriching the urban environment. This was quite a different project. Initially, this is for Central Park in New York City, and this was early in my career, and there was something called a cost overrun, and I didn't know how to do it. I was so idealistic, I stood my ground, and I said, no, this is what I need. So obviously, I didn't get the commission. So anyhow, there was... So 20 years went by, and an individual came to my studio and seen the drawings of this, and decided that they wanted to commission this for St. Louis Zoo. And so I took that and I manifested that. So here you have the environment with the animals, these stylized kind of banner shapes then become water, and within the water there's fish and alligators. And so after I did the drawings, I did this cardboard model, which is 15 foot long. And those animals maybe are 8 inches high. And then I had to go into another phase. Well, how do you make steel look like feathers? And how do you make it look like fur or patterns? So we went through this incredibly, it ended up being a 5-year project. So here you see the cardboard model, the small metal model, making sure that the metal would do what the cardboard did. And now you see it being fabricated. So you enter in, this becomes another ceremonial archway. You enter into the realm of the animals. Klein Steel in Rochester, that I've been dealing with for over 40 years, that supplies all of my steel to me, this did a new corporate headquarters, and they said that they wanted a piece of my work for that. And I said, well, why don't I do something that's indicative of your industry? So they sell I-beams and pipes, and then if you want something out of steel, they'll cut it out of steel. So I said, why don't you let me just use all of your materials, and I'll build something for that. Plus, they could obviously write off all the materials, so that was a good... So here I did these developmental drawings of that. This was a model that I did. Now, the plates that you see the model sitting on, these were plates from the zoo where we had cut all the different forms, and these are called drops. It's what's left over. These are normally just goes to the scrap yard. So I said, you cut these forms out, but I said, that really talks about process. Why don't we use these as part of that? So here you can see those sheets then become these kind of transparent screens. And this was the architectural model that I did. The engineering was unbelievably complicated because this weighed, I think it was 150 ton. And so here you see the plates. These are cut-out plates. They're just flimsy plates. So here they had to be structurally supported. And then, so here you have this kind of constructivist architectonic thing, and then as you look through as you look through the pierced objects, well, excuse me, when you look through the pierced objects, you see fish and birds and all of that from the zoo project. So it was kind of interesting. And how it plays out, the positive and the negative. I mean, the negative being the open areas, but that's just as strong as the steel itself. So here you can see, like a leaf shape that was in the zoo, and now it becomes a part of the sky, which is incredible. And it's painted safety yellow to respond to that. These are just some other things that you see. This is for Swanee, Georgia. It's the University of the South. These are gates for pedestrian arena. The Washington Cathedral was started in 1906, and in 2006 it was completed. There was one chapel, the Chapel of the Good Shepherd, that had not been completed. And I was commissioned to do gates for that. So the symbolism of the shepherd's crook and you can see that installed. This was a work for National Harbor. It's a work called The Beckoning, and I was given the charge of, at that time, he was talking about American optimism. And so this is a 100-foot tall sculpture. This was the maquette. This is the working conditions in Rochester, New York. They were all polychromed work. And then also, they were doing the main plaza there, and the developer had seen the zoo work and asked if I could do 2 large eagles for the plaza. So these are the mock-ups of the eagles. Oh, yeah, we're on time schedule here. I'm sorry, I got to move here. This is the Clay Center. It's a cultural center in West Virginia. This is a major sculpture for that. This piece I had is about 8 foot tall. It's a sculpture I had on an international exhibition in Mexico City. And a politician saw it and said, "Oh, I really like that. And could you do that 100 foot high?" And I said, "Sure." So this was the drawing that you see. This is the maquette. This was constructed on site. This is the Sierra Madre Mountains, and the sculpture it's being painted, so that's the undercoating, and so here you see it's a major sentinel along this major highway. It's comparable to like an 11-story building. This act of passage was exemplified by this is at Council Bluffs, Iowa. I did 4 sculptures, 80 foot tall, on this bridge. The theme was mechanization of, basically it's a farming community, mechanization in the land. So here you see this like combine and the air, and when you're in a plane going over, you see this grid work of farms and drainage ditches. So that became the context of that. I had just moved into the new studio in the Park Avenue Conservancy. They have 2 exhibitions every year on Park Avenue in New York. They said that in 3 years hence that they invited me to have an exhibition, and would I be interested? So I figured in that period of time I could do 13 sculptures. And they said, well, that's good. Well, we need a proposal in a week. So what I did is I went to my archives and I picked out drawings of various things that hadn't been completed. I took the drawings and I did a photo mock-up of the drawing in front of the sites. And so here you see that. and I did the photo montage. I selected 13 sites. Some of them are iconic landmarks. It went from the financial district in 52nd Street up to the Armory on 67th. So here you can see the development of the pattern work. It was an extensive, we did 13 sculptures at the same time. As soon as one would finish, something else would leave. It was an incredible, there was a major documentary. So it would start with the drawing. From the drawing, it would go into a model, and the model then was the structural engineering and the developmental stage. And here you can see we're involved with all the installation. So here, this piece in this location. Here you can see the verticality and the geometry of the building, and I wanted to create this lyricism. Here you can see the heating and forming happening. You know, to create a sense of space, a place, and a sense of identity and focus in New York is very difficult. So I wanted these pieces visually strong enough that they competed with that environment. This one's called Jester. And at this point, all of these sculptures have been sold. 2 of them went to cities. There's one in Australia, and there's one in New Zealand. And then the rest of them are and 2 are in universities. Yeah, so at this point, each one was different from the other, and I wanted to show the spectrum of what I was involved in. Some of them are very lyrical, such as this one. This one's in Kansas City now. This is a little more geometric. And then this work is called Envious Composure, interlaced work. This became the focus of the documentary, and this was just purchased by Purdue University. This was the last piece to sell. What's kind of interesting is that these came from different sources. This was a lithograph that I had done many years ago, and it had these geometric forms, and you know, I'm talking about cutting out cardboard, you know, so here you can see this form that's cut out and other things go through it, and I figured, oh, that's kind of interesting. So I cut this print, and I cut the print up, and this is the photo montage, and I cut the print up and reassembled it. So almost everything was vertical on Park Avenue, but the Seagram's building is the only building that stresses the horizontal. So this was the proposal. From the proposal, I did the cardboard mock-up, and here you can see the fabrication. And this was, we had a party, and this is my staff as of that time. And this was the documentary that was done. A year after that, this was the retrospective I had at the Corcoran Museum, and Paul Greenhouse was the one that instituted that. I knew him from the Victoria and Albert Museum. And Ron Abramson made this exhibition possible. This is the whole spread of my career, from the goldsmithing to the architectural work. This is the prototype for the National Cathedral. Some of the work that I'm doing in glass, and this is the prototype for the work in, it's called Envious, the one in Monterrey, Mexico. There's also one room of all maquettes of things that were unrealized, the projects that never happened for one reason or another. This is the kind of some of the last things. We just did this piece in Odessa, Texas. It's for Texas Tech. Whoa, there we go. That was just to get your attention, you understand. So here you see the piece being constructed, put on the truck. This is Breckenridge, Colorado, ski community. I did a work entitled Syncline, which means like a downward grade. And those of you that are skiing, I wanted to have the curve of the slopes and then these banner shapes the experience that you would have through skiing. So that was kind of the symbolism of the piece. That play of line is very important. This is one of the last projects. This is in the Chattanooga, Tennessee. Two sculptures. One's 65 foot tall, that you right along the Tennessee River, and the other a small pedestrian piece. So people walk in and through it as well. Just a separate body of work. I usually deal with metal, but I've been going into other materials. I've been doing a lot of glass lately. I go into glass studios and work with the artists and artisans or an industrial application. And I show them the kind of forms that I want, and I work with them. So dealing with hot steel, it's very plastic, and obviously glass is plastic. Even though the materials are different, it's all forms derived from fire. I would then do these like this glass, and then after the glass comes back to my studio, I would then do metal that was sympathetic to the glass and create these sculptures. So here you can see the sense of lyricism. The same line quality is there, but also the materials are different. There's a major exhibition. This is cast glass, which has a tendency to be more geometric. But you can see as you poured the glass, these were in sand molds, you can see that the sand would fuse every time you would pour the glass. And they wanted to, sandblast that and take that away. But I said, no, that really talks about how the glass is formed. The same as like, wood grain shows how the tree would grow. So I figured, okay, the glass says that, and here the torch, as it cuts the steel, explains how that form happens. So you get that, that relationship, and the patina of the bronze as compared to the green of the glass. And then I started combining cast glass and blown glass, with that into a composite piece such as this. So, as I said before, I start with drawings, and then I cut out cardboard, and I form the cardboard to make the three-dimensional models. And here you can see this cardboard has been cut, and then that's the image. So then I took the cardboard and I put ink on it, and then started doing a series of prints. So it's the same process, kind of in a different vernacular. And so here you can see what happens. And then you flip it over and ink transfers to another thing. These are all monoprints. And so I would go to master printers, and I would do a series of those. I had a commission from an individual that commissioned a dining room table, came in, and so happens this individual is a antique rug dealer. And he said, boy, he says, these would make great rugs. So he went to India to try to have rugs made, and it didn't work out. And so he's getting, they're hand knotted in Nepal. So these prints, each one is going to be an addition of 12 rugs per print. So he would take the coloration of that, match it with the various dyes. These are high end. It's like the certain kind of sheep and what the sheep are fed, and then it's the natural dyes. And then they would do a computer printout that has all the graph on it where each individual one, and then the colors are indicated. And these are 144 knots per square inch. This is a 9 by 12 rug that you can see. And this is the project we're now working on. This is in Toronto, Canada. It's on Yonge and Clover Street on the major intersection. We designed the sculpture for right down there. This was the maquette. And so this was as last week in my studio. So this will come apart in sections and then sandblasted and painted. This will be installed in about a year and a half. Thank you. I don't know if we have any time or not, but I think there was some question and answer session, so you have something there, or?
You can pass, there it goes. If you can pass your comment cards down to my colleagues who are on the side, they can collect them. We just have time for a few questions. You also are welcome to go upstairs to join us briefly for the reception. I'm going to get started with this one. I'm fortunate enough to worship at Washington National Cathedral, and I see your Good Shepherd portal gate frequently. Could you share a brief story about it? You briefly mentioned it in your talk.
Well, one of the interesting things is that, as you know, the National Cathedral is a neo-Gothic cathedral. And after I had done the gates for the Smithsonian, I was invited to the National Cathedral to do something, and I gave them drawings, and they said that they were far too contemporary, for the cathedral. And then about 15 years later, there's a new administration. They had asked me to come in. I did some other designs, and they said, no, they're too contemporary. They don't go with the Gothic flavor. So after that, somebody bought one of the moon rocks back, from the moon, and it was incorporated into a stained glass window. And it so happens that all the tours that went through the National Cathedral, everybody was riveted on this moon rock and the contemporary design around the moon rock. So they thought it might be a good idea to have contemporary work. So I was approached then to do the gate for the Good Shepherd Chapel, and it was the last chapel to be completed. They completed the 100-year situation. And so it's the Good Shepherd Chapel. There's a lot of imagery in there, the shepherd's crook, the nimbus, and various other things. And so that was one of the very important commissions.
Thank you. Are there any artists with whom you've crafted or would like to do a collaboration?
It never works out, I'll tell you. It never works out. It's not that artists are independent necessarily, but I mean, for me, it's not, even though I've done a lot of work, it's not creating a product. For me, personally, it's an experience. I've been very fortunate of having commissions to experience certain things. And for me, it's part of the learning process. I mean, I don't know what I'm capable of doing or capable of experiencing until I do it. And so for me, that's the reality of that, and it isn't project-oriented that way. I mean, I'm very skilled in what I do, but after I learn a skill, for me, it's not important because then it just becomes repetitive. So for me, it's always trying to do something or experiencing something that's unknown, and that's kind of the, how can I apply my abilities, how can I apply my skill, and it creates the generation of new perception and new insight. So that kind of collaboration doesn't happen. When I'm dealing with architects, usually I've been very fortunate. I've been given free rein. They say, here's a space. This is kind of not what they want to see, but this is kind of the attitude or the ambiance, and then I try to do something that's appropriate for that space. So,
what would you trace your first artwork to? They reference Daniel Chester French's first sculptures used his mother's root vegetables. So were you using root vegetables or another medium?
Huh. That's difficult. I mean, okay. I mean, I communicate my feelings or my ideas through a visual language. This is basically abstract. And normally we communicate verbally through language. So if I asked you, what words do you use and where do they come from? It becomes part of the, your visual sense is one of your most acute senses. I mean, we all experience those things. You know, you see a leaf blowing in the air, and the air is invisible, and gravity is invisible, but we experience all of that, and that becomes part of the vocabulary. For me, three-dimensional work is a fundamental reality, because I'm physical, I'm in space, and for me, there's that kind of relationship. Most of these things, dealing with motion and gesture, it's all part of the ephemeral condition, you know, the play of shadows and how all that happens. So nothing is as succinct and as specific as that. It's more of a kind of an awareness and a sensibility. I mean, you know, when does something feel overpowering? When does something have intimacy? When does something lyrical, you know? And this is a human condition that we all have, and we experience different ways. Some people like certain kinds of music, other people don't. And basically, for an artist, the artwork kind of manifests the individual's sensibilities and understanding of what they consider reality, I guess.
Thank you. I think you just touched on this a little bit, but what keeps you excited, besides money and prestige, to continue your craft with such elegance?
Money is totally transient. It comes and goes. There's no lasting quality. For me, one of the reasons that I became involved in art is the process of art. It's one of evolution. It's one of involvement. And also for me, specifically, with self-realization. I mean, I don't know what I'm capable of doing until I do it. I don't know how I feel about something until I experience it. And I've been fortunate enough to create an environment that allows me to experience those things and hopefully to share those things humanistically in the broader social context. So thank you very much.